In this video, we're going to take a look at Standard 8.7c, which says the student is expected to use the Pythagorean Theorem and its converse to solve problems. A couple of things to note about this standard is, first of all, that the Pythagorean Theorem can only be applied to right triangles, and that also students in 8th grade now are able to use graphing calculators on the 8th grade STAR test, so we want to see them using those calculators in class during regular instruction. This is a standard that would make a lot of the computation easier for students, so we want to see them using graphing calculators. In our district, we have TI-84s and TI-Inspires. A couple of things to review with you. Here's some terminology that goes along with this standard. A right triangle is a triangle with one right angle, which means that one angle measures exactly 90 degrees and two acute angles. The legs of a right triangle are the two shortest sides of a right triangle. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right triangle, and it's the side opposite the right angle. The Pythagorean theorem says that the sum of the squares of the legs of a right triangle equals the square of the hypotenuse. The converse of the Pythagorean theorem says if the sum of the squares of the two shortest sides of a triangle equals the square of the third side, then the triangle is a right triangle. Here's a picture of a right triangle. We know it's a right triangle because of the right triangle marking indicated in this right angle here. So the side opposite that right angle is the hypotenuse, and that is the longest side of the right triangle. The other two sides are called the legs, and they're the two shorter sides of the right triangle. The Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a is one of the legs, b is one of the legs, and c is the hypotenuse. On the day of the STAR test, students are provided with a reference material sheet, and this is the reference materials for 8th grade. And under additional information, the Pythagorean theorem is provided for students. So they have this formula with them on the day of the STAR test. Let's look at a released item. This item comes from the 2016 8th grade STAR test. The problem says, the set designer for a play painted some background scenery on a large piece of plywood. He used a 13-foot long pole to hold the piece of plywood upright, as shown in the diagram below. What is h, the total height in feet of the piece of plywood? So h is the total height. And you can see here we have a measurement from the top of the triangle to the top of the piece of plywood of 2 feet. Okay, so we know that this is a right triangle because of the right triangle marking here. So since we know it's a right triangle, we can use the Pythagorean theorem to find the missing side. So I'm going to go ahead and label my sides. I'm going to label this side here as A. And remember, A is only calculating the length of the leg of the triangle. So it's going to go from the bottom to right here. That will be the length of A. I'm going to label the bottom leg as B, and of course the hypotenuse has to be our C. So now we're going to substitute into the formula for Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. I don't know the value of a, that is what we're trying to find. So I'm going to leave that as a squared. We do know that b has a value of 5 by looking at this picture. So we substitute that in and we get 5 squared. Equals c squared, when the c, or a hypotenuse, is labeled with a length of 13 feet. So equals 13 squared. So we're going to go ahead and solve for a. So a squared plus, I'm going to go ahead and square 5. 5 squared is 25 equals 13 squared, which is 169. We need to isolate the variable, so I'm going to subtract 25 from both sides of the equation. And that's going to leave us with a squared equals 144. So to isolate the variable, to undo the squared, the opposite or inverse operation of squaring is taking the square root. So we're going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. The square root of a squared will just leave us the variable a. The square root of 144 is plus or minus 12. The answer can be positive 12 or negative 12. Now, in this problem situation, since we are talking about a length, we disregard the negative value. So for our problem situation, A is going to be positive 12 because we can't have a negative length. So A is 12. So we know here that leg of the triangle, the right triangle, is 12. But we want to know H. So H is the length of the triangle plus 2 more feet. So to find H, we have to take the length of this leg of the right triangle, which was A, and we're going to have to add 2 to it. Well, we found A. We solved for A using the Pythagorean theorem. We know A is 12. So the height of this piece of plywood is 14 feet.